The girl woke up before the sun, just like she did every day. The small room she lived in was quiet, except for the sound of the old ceiling fan turning slowly above her head. The air was warm, but she didn't mind. She was used to discomfort. She sat up on the thin mattress, stretched her tired arms, and looked around the room that held everything she owned. A small table, one chair, a mirror with a crack down the side, and a bag where she kept her clothes. That was her world. She washed her face with cold water, tied her hair neatly, and put on her faded uniform. The uniform had been washed so many times that the color no longer looked new, but she kept it clean. She believed that even if life was hard, dignity should not be lost. Before leaving, she paused for a moment, took a deep breath, and whispered a quiet prayer. She didn't ask for miracles. She only asked for strength to get through another day. The restaurant was already busy when she arrived. Plates clattered, chairs scraped the floor, and voices filled the air. The smell of food mixed with stress and impatience. She stepped inside softly, like someone who didn't want to be noticed. She greeted her coworkers with a small smile, but most of them were too busy to respond. Everyone here was tired. Everyone was trying to survive. Her manager stood near the counter, arms crossed, watching the staff like a guard watching prisoners. His eyes always seemed to find her first. She felt it the moment she entered. That heavy look, full of judgment, followed her wherever she went. She lowered her head and went straight to work, wiping tables, arranging plates, checking orders. She moved fast, careful not to make mistakes. Still, no matter how careful she was, it was never enough for him. If a glass was placed slightly wrong, it was her fault. If a customer complained, even without reason, it was her fault. He never raised his voice at others the way he did at her. With her, he didn't bother hiding his dislike. Sometimes he mocked her in front of the staff. Sometimes he whispered sharp words meant only for her ears. Either way, it hurt. She didn't talk back. She never had. She needed the job too badly. This job paid her rent. This job paid for her food. Without it, she had nothing. So she swallowed her pride and kept moving. Among the customers that day was a man who didn't look like the others. He dressed simply, but something about him felt different. He sat alone at a corner table, ordering very little, staying longer than most people did. He watched the restaurant quietly. His eyes were calm, but they noticed everything. He noticed how the girl worked harder than anyone else. He noticed how she checked on customers twice, sometimes 3 times, just to be sure they were comfortable. He noticed how she apologized even when things weren't her fault. Most of all, he noticed how she was treated. When the manager spoke to her, the man saw her shoulders tense. When the manager laughed with others, the man saw how she stood a little farther away, like she was trying not to exist. Once, when the manager blamed her for a delayed order, the man saw her eyes fill with tears that she quickly wiped away. Before anyone else could see, the man felt something tighten in his chest. Not anger yet. Something deeper. Something familiar. The girl came to his table to serve him. Her voice was soft when she asked if he needed anything. She didn't look directly at him at first, out of habit more than fear. When she finally did, her eyes met his for just a second. There was kindness there. Tired, but real. She smiled politely and waited. He thanked her, his voice calm and respectful. She nodded and walked away. It was a small moment. A moment that meant nothing to the rest of the world. But to him, it meant everything. As she walked back to the counter, the manager snapped at her for standing still too long. She didn't argue. She simply said sorry and moved faster. The man watched this too. His fingers tightened slightly around his cup. The rest of the shift passed slowly for her. Every hour felt longer than the last. Her feet hurt. Her back ached. Still, she kept going. When her break finally came, she didn't sit with the others. She stepped outside, standing near the back door, eating a small piece of bread she had brought from home. She looked up at the sky, letting the fresh air touch her face. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine a life where she didn't feel invisible. Inside. The man paid his bill and stood up. Before leaving, he glanced once more in her direction. She was laughing softly at something a customer had said, even though she looked exhausted. That small laugh stayed with him. When she returned to work, the manager reminded her that mistakes would not be tolerated. His tone was sharp, almost threatening. She nodded again. Inside, her heart felt heavy. She wondered how long she could keep living like this. But she pushed the thought away. Thinking too much made things worse. As evening approached, the restaurant grew louder. Orders came in faster. The pressure increased. She moved quickly between tables, careful with every step. One wrong move could cost her everything. The man was gone by then, but his presence lingered like a quiet promise she didn't know existed. She didn't know she had been seen. She didn't know someone had noticed her pain, her patience, her strength. She only knew that tomorrow would come. She would wake up before the sun again. When her shift finally ended, she changed out of her uniform and stepped into the night. The city lights felt distant. She walked home alone, counting her steps, holding her bag close. Her life was hard, but she still believed in kindness. She believed that being good mattered even when the world wasn't fair. Behind the scenes, far away from her small room and tired feet, the man who had watched her that day sat in silence thinking. He remembered a time when he too had been invisible. He remembered a girl with the same gentle eyes, who had once helped him without knowing who he was, and as the night grew quiet, fate slowly began to move, bringing two lives closer again. Even though neither of them knew it yet, the next morning she woke up earlier than usual. Her back ached from yesterday's shift, but she forced herself out of bed. There was no time to rest. Life didn't wait for anyone, and she had to face the day again. She quickly washed her face, tied her hair, and put on her uniform. Already wrinkled from the previous day but clean, she walked to the restaurant, the streets slowly waking up. Vendors were setting up their small stalls, selling fruit and bread, while people hurried past, carrying briefcases and bags. She kept her head down, not wanting to attract attention. Every day felt like a test, one she didn't always pass in her own eyes. When she entered the restaurant, the manager's eyes immediately found her. He didn't say anything, but the look he gave her made her shoulders slump slightly. It was a look that reminded her of every mistake she had made, every word of criticism, every small humiliation endured. She forced herself to take a deep breath and begin her work. She moved from table to table, making sure everything was perfect. Every plate, every glass, every order needed to be right. She knew the manager's eyes were on her constantly, waiting for a slip. She could hear the customers' complaints and requests, but she didn't let them frustrate her. She reminded herself that her calmness was her shield. Meanwhile, the man who had come the previous day was already there, sitting quietly in the same corner. Today, he was not alone, but he was alone in his observation. He noticed the way her fingers trembled slightly as she carried heavy trays, the way her lips pressed together to hold back frustration, and the way she smiled at customers despite the wait. She carried inside, the manager started his usual routine of picking on her. He shouted at her for serving a dish a few seconds late. The words cut sharply through the busy noise of the restaurant. She felt heat rise to her face but didn't respond. She simply apologized and continued her work. No one else seemed to notice, too focused on their own tasks. But he saw it. He always did. The man in the corner felt his hand tighten around his cup. He wanted to speak, to tell the manager that his behavior was unacceptable, but he stayed quiet. He wanted to see the girl finish her shift without losing her patience, to see her strength and courage, even in the face of cruelty. Something about her made him want to protect her, to care for her without her even knowing. Lunch hour came, and the restaurant became chaos. Orders were everywhere, and the noise was overwhelming. Yet she moved with precision, remembering every customer's preference, every table's needs. Her body ached, but she kept moving. She didn't allow herself to break. Not yet. A customer accidentally spilled a drink on her apron. The manager laughed loudly, making a sarcastic comment about her clumsiness. She froze for a moment, but then she removed the wet apron, wiped the spill, and continued without a word. Inside, she felt anger boiling, but she kept it locked away. Showing it would only make things worse. The man noticed her hand shaking slightly as she adjusted the tray. He had to remind himself that she was only human, even if she seemed tireless. He realized that her courage wasn't loud or flashy. It was quiet, it was gentle, and it made him respect her more than anything he had seen before. The rest of the day was a blur. She ran between tables, took orders, carried trays, cleaned messes, and smiled at customers. Every small victory felt temporary, but it was enough to keep her going. Every apology, every kind word, every careful action was a small way to survive. As the evening approached, the manager's cruelty intensified. He barked orders at her, criticized her movements, and made snide remarks in front of the staff. She bit her lip and continued. She couldn't afford a confrontation, not when her job meant everything. But each word left a sting, a small wound she carried silently. The man left before closing time, but he couldn't leave his thoughts behind. He kept thinking about her, about how someone could treat her so badly when she only tried to do her best. He wondered about her life outside these walls, about the struggles she faced, and the dreams she quietly held on to. After her shift, she walked home, tired beyond words. She thought about the day, about every harsh word, every difficult moment, and yet she also thought about the small smiles, the moments of kindness, the customers who appreciated her. They were small sparks of light in a world that often felt dark. She returned to her small room, sat on the edge of her bed and rested her head in her hands. The room was quiet, the fan turning slowly above her. She thought about the man who had noticed her, who had watched her work without judgment, who had seen her humanity. It was strange to imagine someone noticing her in such a way. She wondered why he had come and why he had looked at her with such gentle eyes. She ate a small meal, thinking about the little comforts in life that were often overlooked. A warm meal, a clean shirt, a safe place to sleep. She valued these things more than people would ever know. She knew that even small victories mattered. She got ready for bed, feeling the exhaustion that only came from giving her all, and still being undervalued. She lay down, thinking about the man she had served earlier in the day. She didn't know why, but she felt a strange sense of comfort, knowing that someone had seen her. Truly seen her, even if only for a moment, as she drifted off to sleep. She didn't know that this was only the beginning of a change. That in the quiet corners of the restaurant, someone had noticed not just her struggle, but her strength, her kindness, and her unwavering dignity. And that in time, her life was about to take a turn that she could never have imagined. The morning light came slowly into her small room. She stretched and sat on the edge of her bed, feeling the weight of yesterday pressing on her shoulders. She had faced another long day, another round of criticism and humiliation, and yet she still had to keep moving forward. Life demanded it, and she could not stop. She got up, washed her face, and tied her hair. Her uniform, worn and faded, was neatly pressed, ready for another day. As she walked to the restaurant, she noticed the streets had changed slightly with the new day. The city was waking up, and the sounds of vendors, carts, and distant traffic filled the air. She kept her eyes forward, moving quietly, not wanting to attract attention. Every step was measured careful, almost like walking a tightrope. She knew that one misstep could lead to another humiliation from the manager. Inside the restaurant, the atmosphere was already tense. The manager stood near the counter, observing everything and everyone. His eyes immediately locked on her, and she felt the familiar sinking feeling in her chest. He didn't speak at first, but his glare was enough to make her feel small. She swallowed her fear and moved to her station, preparing for another grueling day. The customers began to fill the restaurant quickly. Lunch hour arrived, and the pace picked up. She moved from table to table with precision, balancing trays with heavy dishes, answering questions, refilling drinks, and smiling politely. Despite the fatigue in her muscles, she never let it show. Her strength was quiet, almost invisible, but it carried her through each hour. The manager began his usual routine. He pointed out the slightest mistakes, raised his voice, and sometimes made cruel jokes at her expense. She felt the sting of every word, but did not respond. She had learned that silence and endurance were her only weapons. Any confrontation would only make things worse. She focused on her work, moving faster and more carefully, her heart pounding in her chest. The man from before arrived again, sitting quietly at his usual corner table. He had seen her struggle before, and today he noticed something more. He saw her pause for a moment, just for a second, to catch her breath before returning to the relentless pace of her work. He noticed her exhaustion, the small tremble in her hands, the tired lines around her eyes, and yet he saw her continue without complaint. Her determination was like a light in the otherwise harsh world around her. A young child accidentally knocked over a glass of water. The manager laughed loudly, pointing and mocking her clumsiness, though she had not caused it. She felt her cheeks burn with humiliation, but immediately cleaned the mess, apologized to the customer, and moved on. Inside, she felt a mixture of anger and resignation. She wanted to cry, to scream, but she could not afford to show weakness. The man watched silently. He wanted to speak, to defend her, to stand up against the cruelty she endured, but he held back. He wanted her to see that someone noticed her efforts, someone valued her strength, even if it was not obvious to everyone else. He wanted her to know, without words, that her struggle was not invisible. As the day continued, the pace only increased. She served table after table, refilled drinks, took orders, and dealt with complaints. Every action required precision and patience. She moved through the chaos with a focus that seemed almost superhuman. Her exhaustion was evident in the way she leaned slightly as she carried heavy trays, but she did not stop. She could not stop. The manager's behavior grew harsher as the afternoon wore on. He criticized her for things she could not control, laughed at her mistakes, and compared her unfavorably to other staff. Each word felt like a weight on her shoulders. Yet she continued. She had to, because survival meant enduring. The man left before the evening rush. But the impression she left on him was lasting. He thought about her resilience, her quiet dignity, and her unwavering dedication despite the constant humiliation. He wondered about her life outside the restaurant, about the struggles she faced, the sacrifices she made, and the dreams she quietly held. After her shift, she walked home slowly. Her body ached from standing and moving for hours, her muscles sore and her feet tired. She held her bag close, thinking about the small comforts waiting for her at home. Her thoughts wandered to the man who had observed her. She wondered who he was, why he had noticed her, and why his presence felt comforting even though she had never spoken to him. In her small room, she sat on her bed and ate a simple meal, thinking about the day. She reflected on the harsh words, the small victories, the moments of kindness, and the fleeting moments of recognition. She felt both weariness and a quiet hope. Hope that her efforts, her endurance, her strength would eventually be noticed and rewarded. As night fell, she lay down, her body exhausted but her mind still alert. She thought about the man who had watched her that day, about the kindness she imagined in his gaze, and about the possibility that life could change. She didn't know how or when, but she allowed herself to imagine a world where she was appreciated, where her strength and resilience were recognized. She closed her eyes, letting sleep slowly take over, knowing that tomorrow would bring another challenge, another day of endurance, and another opportunity to survive. And in the quiet of the night, somewhere in the city, the man remembered her face, her courage, and her quiet dignity. He knew that he had seen something rare, something extraordinary, and that their paths were destined to cross again. Even if neither of them realized it yet, the morning came quietly. With the sun spilling its first light over the rooftops, she woke with a heavy body, each muscle still sore from yesterday. Her eyes opened slowly, taking in the familiar surroundings of her small room. The fan above moved lazily, making soft worry sounds. She sat up and rubbed her face, feeling the weight of the upcoming day pressing down on her. She had a routine: now wake up, dress, face the restaurant, survive. But today felt different. There was a tension in the air she could not place. After washing her face and tying her hair neatly, she put on her uniform. Despite its faded colors, she ironed it as best as she could. Every day she presented herself as neat and professional, even if her heart was heavy with exhaustion and anxiety. She left her room and walked down the narrow streets toward the restaurant. Vendors called out their wares, and people hurried past, lost in their own worlds. She moved quietly, careful not to bump into anyone or draw unnecessary attention. As she entered the restaurant, the familiar bustle surrounded her. The noise of clattering plates, shouting orders, and the hiss of the coffee machine filled her ears. Her manager was already there, arms crossed, his gaze sharp and unyielding. She felt the usual pit of fear and anxiety in her stomach, but forced herself to straighten her back and move to her station. There was no room for weakness here. Every day demanded her strength and her calm. The morning rush began quickly. Customers filled the tables, placing orders, chatting loudly, and sometimes complaining. She moved from table to table, refilling drinks, answering questions, and making sure every plate looked perfect. Her hands shook slightly as she carried heavy trays, but she didn't let it show. Her face remained composed, her smile polite, even when the manager's voice cut through the noise like a knife. He began his usual routine of criticism. He pointed out mistakes she hadn't made, raised his voice, and made sarcastic remarks. She felt the familiar sting of humiliation but didn't respond. She had learned to keep her mouth shut and her focus sharp. Arguing would only make things worse. She carried on, moving faster, anticipating his next move. The man from the corner table had returned once again. He was quiet, sitting alone, observing the world around him, and most of all, watching her. He noticed how tirelessly she worked, how her back ached, how her hands moved with precision despite the exhaustion. He saw the small moments of kindness she offered to customers, polite smiles she gave, and the way she remained composed under constant pressure. It was not just her strength he noticed, but her dignity, her resilience, her humanity. A small child spilled a drink at one of the tables, and the manager laughed harshly, pointing at her as if she were to blame. She froze for a moment, her cheeks burning, but then quickly cleaned the mess, apologized to the customer, and moved on. Inside, anger and frustration burned, but she swallowed it down. She had to. Showing emotion would only give the manager more power over her. The man in the corner noticed the tremor in her hands, tension in her shoulders, and the exhaustion in her eyes. He wanted to step in, to defend her, but he stayed silent. He wanted to witness her strength, her courage, her endurance. He admired the quiet way she carried herself, the way she maintained her dignity, even when treated unfairly. It was extraordinary, and he could not look away. The morning rush turned into afternoon chaos. Orders flew in from every table. Drinks needed refills. Plates needed clearing. She moved like a whirlwind, her feet aching, her muscles screaming for rest. Yet she did not stop. She did not falter. Every action was calculated, precise, and deliberate. Her heart pounded, but she kept going. Each smile, each apology, each polite word was a tiny victory against the constant pressure and humiliation. The manager's behavior grew even more relentless. He criticized her openly, comparing her to other staff, making sarcastic remarks that cut deeply. She bit her lip and continued, refusing to let tears or anger show. She had survived this long by staying quiet and keeping her focus. Today would be no different. By late afternoon, the restaurant's pace slowed slightly, but the tension did not ease. She moved from table to table, checking on customers, refilling drinks, clearing plates. Her back ached, her hands were sore, and her feet were blistered, but she continued. Each small task completed was a personal victory, a reminder that she could endure. The man who had been observing her left quietly before the evening rush. He could not stop thinking about her resilience, her courage, and her unwavering dignity in the face of constant humiliation. He wondered about her life outside the restaurant, the sacrifices she made, and the dreams she held on to quietly. He felt a deep sense of admiration and a growing desire to help her, to see her free from the constant pressure she endured. After her shift, she walked home slowly. Her body ached, her muscles screamed for rest, but her mind was alert. She held her bag close and thought about the day. The manager's words echoed in her mind, but she focused on the small victories, the customers who smiled at her, the moments of genuine interaction, and the quiet satisfaction of having done her best in her small room. She prepared a simple meal and ate quietly, thinking about the day. She reflected on the moments of humiliation, the moments of kindness, and the endurance she had shown. She felt a mixture of weariness and quiet hope. Hope that her efforts, her strength, and her resilience would be recognized and appreciated, even if not by those who mistreated her. As night fell, she lay down, feeling the exhaustion that only comes from giving everything and still being undervalued. She thought about the man who had observed her during the day. It's about the kindness she imagined in his gaze, and the possibility that life could change. She didn't know how or when, but she allowed herself to imagine a world where her strength and resilience were recognized, where she could be appreciated for who she was. Sleep slowly claimed her, and in the quiet of the night, somewhere in the city, the man thought of her. He remembered her courage, her dignity, and the quiet way she carried herself. He knew that he had seen something rare and extraordinary, something worth protecting. And though neither of them realized it yet, their lives were moving closer together, guided by fate. Ready to change in ways neither could have imagined, the morning started quietly. With the sun barely rising over the city skyline, she opened her eyes, feeling the familiar ache in her muscles and joints. Her small room was cool, and the faint sound of the fan above her head created a gentle rhythm. She sat up, rubbed her face, and tried to shake off the lingering tiredness from the previous days. Her life had become a routine of endurance, of surviving each day without letting the weight of humiliation and hard work break her spirit. She stood, washed her face with cold water, tied her hair, and carefully put on her uniform. The uniform was worn and faded, but she kept it neat. She had learned early on that appearances mattered, even if life itself was cruel. She left her room, stepping out into the slowly waking city streets. Vendors were setting up their stalls, calling out to potential customers. People walked briskly, lost in their own concerns. She moved quietly, blending in, keeping her head down as always. Entering the restaurant, she felt the familiar tension in the air. The clatter of dishes, the hiss of the coffee machine, the shouting of orders was all part of her daily battlefield. Her manager was already there, his gaze sharp, his posture rigid. She felt the familiar sinking feeling in her stomach, but she forced herself to stand tall. She had faced him countless times before, and she knew she had to endure today as well. The morning rush began immediately. Orders came in rapidly, and she moved from table to table with practiced precision. Her hands shook slightly from the fatigue in her muscles, but she did not let it show. Every plate, every glass, every detail had to be perfect. She smiled at the customers, answered questions, refilled drinks, and cleared tables efficiently. Inside, she felt the exhaustion pressing on her, but she ignored it. She could not afford to falter. As usual, her manager started his criticism early. He pointed out minor mistakes, raised his voice unnecessarily, and made sarcastic comments meant to humiliate her. Her cheeks burned, but she remained silent, swallowing her pride. Arguing or reacting would only make things worse. She had learned that survival meant enduring. No matter how unjust the treatment was, the man from the corner table had returned once again. He observed quietly, watching her with careful attention. He noticed the small tremble in her hands, the tension in her shoulders, and the exhaustion in her eyes. He saw how she moved with precision and grace despite the fatigue, how she handled customers with patience and kindness, and how she endured the constant humiliation from her manager. There was something extraordinary in her quiet strength, and he could not take his eyes off her. A customer accidentally spilled a drink, and the manager laughed cruelly, pointing at her as if she were responsible. She froze for a moment, but quickly cleaned the mess, apologized to the customer, and moved on. Inside, a mix of anger and resignation stirred, but she kept it buried. She had survived this far by keeping her emotions in check, and today would be no different. The lunch rush was relentless. Orders came from every table. Drinks needed refilling. Plates needed clearing. Her feet ached, her back screamed, and her hands were sore, but she continued. Each task required focus, precision, and patience. She moved through the chaos, her body pushing past exhaustion. Every smile she offered, every apology she gave, every careful gesture was a small victory against the relentless pressure. The manager's cruelty intensified as the day went on. He criticized her in front of customers and staff, compared her to others, and made sarcastic remarks. She bit her lip and carried on, refusing to let tears or anger show. She had survived this long through silence and endurance. Today would be no different. The man in the corner table left quietly before the evening rush. He could not stop thinking about her resilience, her courage, and her unwavering dignity. He wondered about her life outside the restaurant, the sacrifices she made, and the dreams she held in her heart. He felt a deep admiration for her, and a growing desire to help her. To see her free from the constant pressure and humiliation she endured daily. After her shift, she walked home slowly. Her muscles ached from standing and moving all day, and her feet were blistered. She held her bag close, thinking about the day's events. She reflected on the moments of humiliation, the small victories, the fleeting moments of recognition, and the kindness she encountered. Despite everything, she felt a quiet hope. Hope that her efforts, her strength, and her resilience would one day be recognized and appreciated in her small room. She prepared a simple meal and ate quietly, thinking about her life. She remembered the man who had observed her during the day, thought the kindness she imagined in his gaze, and the possibility that life could change. She didn't know when or how, but she allowed herself to imagine a world where her strength and resilience were seen and valued. As night fell, she lay down in her bed, feeling the exhaustion that comes from giving everything and still being undervalued. Her body ached, but her mind was alert. She thought about the man, about the quiet admiration she felt from him, the possibility that someone had truly noticed her, not just her work, but her heart and her spirit. Sleep slowly claimed her, and in the quiet of the night, somewhere in the city, the man thought of her. He remembered her courage, her dignity, and the extraordinary way she carried herself. Their lives were moving closer, guided by fate, ready to change in ways neither of them had yet imagined. Tonight, for the first time, she allowed herself to dream that maybe, just maybe, life could be kinder to her. The morning arrived slowly, the first rays of the sun cutting through the gray sky and lighting up her small room. She woke with a heavy body and a tired mind. Her muscles ached from the previous day's work, and her feet still throbbed from long hours standing and moving without rest. She sat on the edge of her bed, taking a deep breath, knowing another difficult day awaited her. She had faced so much already: humiliation, fatigue, and endless criticism, but she had endured. She had to keep going. Survival demanded it. She washed her face, tied her hair neatly, and put on her uniform. The fabric now soft and worn with repeated washes. It was nothing fancy, but she made sure it was clean and neat. A small act of control, a tiny spark of dignity in her otherwise challenging life. She left her room and walked down the streets, still quiet in the early morning. The city was beginning to stir, street vendors shouting, distant car horns, people walking quickly to their jobs. She moved carefully, keeping her eyes forward, focusing only on reaching the restaurant. The restaurant was already busy when she arrived. The sounds of clattering dishes, shouting orders, and the hiss of the coffee machine created a familiar chaos that she had learned to navigate. Her manager's eyes found her immediately, sharp and critical as always. She felt a pit in her stomach, but forced herself to straighten her back and move to her station. She had done this many times before and knew she could do it again. The morning rush began quickly, and she moved from table to table with practiced skill. Every plate, every glass, every detail had to be perfect. Her hands trembled slightly from fatigue, but she did not let it show. Her smile was polite, her voice soft, her movements precise. She dealt with demanding customers, constant orders, and the manager's sharp words without complaint. Each moment required focus and determination, and she gave it willingly. Despite the toll it took on her body and mind, her manager began his routine of criticism early, pointing out minor mistakes and making sarcastic comments. Her cheeks flushed, but she stayed silent. She had learned that arguing or showing frustration would only make things worse. Silence and endurance were her tools, and she wielded them carefully. She moved faster, her focus sharpened. Determined to survive the morning, the man from the corner table arrived again, sitting quietly as he had before. He watched her with careful attention, noticing the subtle tremor in her hands, the exhaustion in her eyes, and the tension in her shoulders. He saw her work tirelessly, balancing trays, answering questions, and ensuring every customer felt cared for. He noticed her patience, her kindness, and her quiet dignity. He wanted to reach out, to tell her that her efforts were seen and appreciated, but he stayed silent. Allowing her strength to shine without interruption, a customer accidentally spilled a drink, and the manager laughed cruelly, pointing at her as if she were at fault. She froze for a moment, but quickly cleaned the mess, apologized to the customer, and moved on. Inside, frustration and anger stirred, but she kept them contained. She had learned to endure, to mask her emotions, and to focus on completing her work with precision. The morning rush turned into the afternoon, and the restaurant's pace never slowed. She ran from table to table, carrying heavy trays, refilling drinks, taking orders, and cleaning up messes. Her body ached, but she continued. Each smile she offered, every polite word she gave, and every small act of service was a triumph against the constant pressure and humiliation she faced. Her manager's behavior grew even harsher as the day went on. He criticized her openly, compared her to other staff, and made sarcastic remarks meant to humiliate her. She bit her lip and moved on, refusing to let him see any signs of distress. She had survived so far by keeping her focus sharp and her emotions in check, and she would survive today in the same way. By late afternoon, her muscles screamed, her feet throbbed, and her hands ached from hours of continuous work. Yet she continued, moving with precision and grace, ensuring each customer felt cared for. Each small success was a personal victory, reminder that she could endure even the harshest treatment. The man in the corner table left quietly before the evening rush. He thought about her tirelessly, about the quiet courage she displayed, the dignity she maintained, and the resilience she had shown despite relentless pressure. He wondered about her life outside the restaurant, the sacrifices she made and the dreams she quietly nurtured. His admiration for her grew, along with the desire to help her and see her free from the constant struggle she endured daily. After her shift, she walked home slowly, her body heavy with exhaustion. Every step was a reminder of the hours spent on her feet, but she held her bag close and thought about the day. She reflected on the moments of humiliation, the small victories, and the fleeting moments of appreciation from customers. Despite everything, she felt a quiet hope that her strength and endurance would one day be recognized, and that she might find relief from the daily challenges she faced in her small room. She prepared a simple meal and ate quietly. She thought about the man who had observed her, imagining the kindness in his eyes, and the possibility that someone truly saw her for who she was, not just her work, but her spirit and her heart. She allowed herself to dream of a world where her efforts were appreciated and where her life could change for the better. As night fell, she lay down, her body exhausted but her mind alert. She thought about the courage she had shown, the dignity she maintained, and the quiet strength that had carried her this far. She thought about the man and the possibility that fate was guiding them together. Sleep slowly claimed her, and in the quiet of the night, somewhere in the city, the man thought of her. He remembered her extraordinary resilience, her dignity, and the quiet way she carried herself. Their paths were moving closer, guided by forces unseen, ready to change both of their lives in ways they could never have imagined. Tonight, she allowed herself to hope that life might finally bring her the recognition, kindness, and change she deserved. The morning was quiet, the city still wrapped in the soft haze of dawn. She awoke feeling the usual ache in her muscles, a reminder of the long days and endless hours she had spent on her feet. Her small room, though simple, felt comforting in its familiarity. She sat on the edge of her bed and took a deep breath, preparing herself for another day of work. Each morning was a test of endurance, of patience, and of courage. She had faced so much already: criticism, humiliation, exhaustion, but she had survived. Today would be no different. She washed her face with cold water, tied her hair neatly, and put on her uniform. The uniform was faded, but she kept it clean and orderly. It was one of the few things she could control in her life, a small symbol of her dignity. She stepped out into the streets, the city beginning to stir. Street vendors called out their goods, and people hurried past, caught up in their own lives. She moved quietly, keeping her head down, focused on reaching the restaurant. Inside the restaurant, the familiar chaos awaited her. The clatter of dishes, the hiss of the coffee machine, and the voices of customers created a whirlwind of noise. Her manager stood near the counter, arms crossed, his gaze sharp and critical. She felt the familiar knot in her stomach but straightened her back and moved to her station. She had faced this routine countless times before, and she knew she could handle it. The morning rush began quickly, and she moved with precision from table to table. Each plate, each glass, each detail had to be perfect. Her hands trembled slightly from fatigue, but she didn't show it. Her smile remained polite, her voice soft, and her movements exact. She handled demanding customers, constant orders, and the manager's harsh words with quiet determination. Every step required focus, patience, and endurance. The manager began his usual routine of criticism early, pointing out minor mistakes and making sarcastic remarks. Her cheeks flushed, but she remained silent. She had learned that showing anger or frustration only gave him more power. Instead, she continued with her work, moving faster, keeping her focus sharp, and using silence as her shield. The man from the corner table arrived once again, sitting quietly as before. He watched her closely, noticing the subtle tremor in her hands, the tension in her shoulders, and the fatigue in her eyes. He saw her tireless work, her careful attention to each customer, and her ability to maintain dignity under relentless pressure. He wanted to intervene, to tell her that she was seen and appreciated, but he stayed silent. He admired the quiet strength that defined her, the resilience that kept her going despite everything. A child accidentally knocked over a drink, and the manager laughed cruelly, pointing at her as if she were responsible. She froze for a moment but quickly cleaned the spill, apologized to the customer, and moved on. Inside, frustration and anger rose, but she kept them contained. She had learned to endure, to mask her emotions, and to focus on completing her work. Each day was a battle. She fought it with grace and resilience. The morning rush turned into the afternoon. The pace of the restaurant never slowed. She ran from table to table, carrying trays, refilling drinks, taking orders, and clearing tables. Her body ached, but she continued. Every smile, every polite word, and every careful gesture was a small victory, a testament to her endurance and courage. The manager's behavior intensified as the day went on. He criticized her in front of customers and staff, compared her to others, and made sarcastic remarks meant to humiliate her. She bit her lip and continued, refusing to let him see any sign of weakness. She had survived this far by keeping her emotions in check and maintaining focus, and she would survive today in the same way. By late afternoon, her muscles ached, her feet throbbed, and her hands were sore. Yet she moved with precision, ensuring each customer received attentive service. Each small success was a personal triumph, a reminder that she could endure even the harshest treatment. She carried on, fueled by quiet determination and the knowledge that her efforts mattered. Even if only a few noticed, the man in the corner table left quietly before the evening rush. He could not stop thinking about her resilience, her courage, and the quiet dignity she maintained despite constant humiliation. He wondered about her life outside the restaurant, the sacrifices she made, and the dreams she held close to her heart. His admiration for her deepened, and with it, a desire to help her and see her freed from the daily struggles she endured. After her shift, she walked home slowly. Every step reminded her of the hours she had spent standing and moving, but she held her bag close and reflected on the day. She thought about the moments of humiliation, the small victories, and the fleeting instances of appreciation from customers. Despite everything, a quiet hope remained within her hope that her strength and resilience would one day be recognized and that her life could change for the better. In her small room, she prepared a simple meal and ate quietly. Thinking about the man who had observed her, she imagined the kindness in his eyes and the possibility that someone had truly noticed her, not just her work, but her spirit and her heart. She allowed herself to dream of a world where her efforts were valued and her life could improve. As night fell, she lay down, exhausted but mentally alert. She thought about the courage she had shown, the dignity she maintained, and the quiet strength that had carried her this far. She thought about the man and the possibility that fate was guiding their paths together. Sleep slowly claimed her, and in the quiet of the night, somewhere in the city, the man thought of her. He remembered her extraordinary resilience, her dignity, and the way she carried herself with quiet strength. Their lives were moving closer, guided by forces unseen, ready to change both of their worlds in ways they had never imagined. Tonight, she allowed herself to hope that life could finally bring her the recognition, kindness, and change she deserved.